Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining our Rewild Long Island webinar, How Our Lawn Care Choices Affect Our Kids, Our Pets, and Ourselves, by Patti, founder and executive director, and Lauren Krueger, project coordinator of Grassroots Environmental Education. I'm so happy to see you all today. Patricia Patti is founder and executive director of Grassroots Environmental Education. A visiting scholar at Adelphi University, Ms. Wood lectures on environment and related health issues in the College of Nursing and Public Health. Ms. Wood is the author of Helping to Heal, a book for parents of children with cancer and other life-threatening illnesses, and co-host of Green Street, a NYC-based weekly radio show. She is a contributing author of Earth Matters, a weekly newspaper column in the Blank Slate newspaper chain, and guest lecturer at Stony Brook University and Hostos Community College in New York City. Lauren Krueger is the project coordinator at Long Island Water, communications and social media director for Grassroots Environmental Education, and associate producer for the Green Street radio show and podcast on WBAI-FM. Lauren is a climate activist who volunteers with Dainu, correct me, Lauren, I probably mispronounced
Perfect.
it. Food and Water Watch and Environews. She's the founder of the South Shore Community Composting Collective. So without further delay, I'll hand it over to Patti and Lauren.
I'm just going to give you a little background on Grassroots Environmental Education, the nonprofit that my husband and I created in the year 2000. And the basic mission was to educate the public about the links between common environmental exposures and human health. We do a lot of work on a lot of different issues. We work a lot on chemicals and exposures, especially in children, to what we would consider chronic low-level contaminants in schools, in their homes, and in their communities. But the work that we have done that relates to what you do here at Rewild is one, we created school gardens, organic school gardens at 4 schools in the Port Washington school system, teaching them all about organic gardening and including composting in that as well. At some of the schools, we also created pollinator gardens, which was early on when most people were not doing that back in the 1990s, and we were, we were really kind of excited about that, and so were the children. We also have a canopy project where we are planting trees, both on town properties and private properties in the town of Port Washington. So far, we have planted 29 native trees, and we take care of them. The town, it seems, and you're probably all familiar with town plantings, they kind of dig a hole the same size as the root ball, and then they plop it in there and then just leave and never come back and hope that that tree is going to survive. In a time like now, where we have had a drought for such a long period of time, it's impossible for a newly planted tree to survive. So we usually take care of these trees that we plant for about 2 years. And we enlist some of our high school volunteers to help us, weeding the tree beds, putting down leaf mold, which the trees love, and making sure that they're watered throughout the season. So that's a little bit of what we do. We did manage the Dodge Farm, which the Cowneck Peninsula group that is part of Rewild Long Island is now maintaining. And we did that for 15 years, having a quite large vegetable garden there and growing food for the local food kitchens. The last thing that you may be interested in is a piece of legislation that was passed in New York State in 2010, and it's called the Child Safe Playing Fields Act. And we wrote that legislation and were able to get unanimous vote from both the Senate and the Assembly to prohibit the use of pesticides on all school properties in New York State. And that law is in place, and we are still, unfortunately, the only state in the United States that has that law. So I'm going to kind of turn this over to Lauren after I just explain what we're doing right now. And I just want to segue from that legislation to prohibit pesticides to a new piece of legislation that we are working on both on the state level and locally. And the local legislation is something that we'd like to talk to you about this evening. We are quite concerned about a family of chemicals. It's a class of chemicals actually called PFAS, which stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl alkyl substances. And there are about 15,000 chemicals in this class of chemicals. They're extremely persistent, which makes, actually they're often called forever chemicals. It's very, very hard for them to break down. And the problem right now on Long Island, and especially in other places where they rely on groundwater or an aquifer for their drinking water, is that these chemicals are easily, leached into our aquifers through lots of different things. You may be familiar with firefighting foam. So we always have, a great deal of contamination at those sites where that firefighting foam is being used, both at airports and for training firemen and at fires themselves. But it is also in fertilizers, which people really do not understand. Especially some people who are working on, creating organic gardens and having a healthy environment around their homes, they may choose a fertilizer that is has a very high content of biosolids. And it sounds like something that's good, right? Biosolids, but actually biosolids is sewage sludge. And this is basically human waste, and it mostly comes from sewage treatment plants in the Midwest, where it is sold both to our conventional agricultural systems as well as fertilizer manufacturers. And so if you use a fertilizer for anything on your property, and it says that it contains biosolids, it also contains PFAS. And once it is out there on your lawn or in your gardens, it is going to leach into the aquifers and run off into our surface waters. And so we are very concerned about that. And so we are trying to get legislation to prohibit any fertilizers to be sold or used on Long Island that contain PFAS or sewage sludge or biosolids, whatever you want to call it. And then we're also concerned about the high nitrogen content in fertilizers. But Lauren's going to show you what we have been doing, talking to organizations all over Long Island just to get public support for that. And it is not Roundup. Roundup is another, it's an herbicide, and that's a very different type of contaminant. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Patti. I think we might be covering some of the same ground, but it never hurts to mention it again. Thank you, Rewild, for allowing us to present tonight. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let's go. So environmental problems can seem really, really large and impossible to deal with. I mean, the scope of them, it's hard to find a way in. It's hard to know where you can help. And what I'm going to show you tonight is a way that you can participate, a way that you can have really good direct impact on something of great importance. Life on Long Island is special because of the water. It's our economic engine, it's our recreation, it's our tourism. We need it. In general, we need water. Everybody needs water. You can't live life without it. It's in everything we drink, everything we eat, everything we cook with. You can't get by without water. But here on Long Island, the water comes from aquifers below us. My video is having a little hiccup here. There we go. The water on Long Island is stored in aquifers below our ground, which means we have a special responsibility because we are right above it, and we need to think carefully about how we're treating the land above the water. The water supply is more fragile than you may think. Even a small change can have a big effect on what we're drinking, the quality of our water supply. Pesticides, industrial chemicals, contaminants from cars, trucks, school buses, other vehicles, even artificial turf are some ways that negatively impact our water supply. And now we're learning that the chemicals that make things waterproof, stain-proof, heat-proof, or stick-proof, non-stick, can be contaminating the water too. These chemicals, as Patti mentioned before, the per and polyfluoroalkyl chemicals, or PFAS, are everywhere. They're in thousands of products, often intentionally. They're in cardboard pizza boxes, they're in mascara, they're in carpeting, firefighting gear, firefighting foam, and sometimes they're used as a slippery substance to help plastic items get out of their mold in manufacturing. Some facts about PFAS is that they can lead to reproductive trouble or cancers, higher blood pressure, kidney trouble, testicular cancer, prostate cancer. They can interfere with hormone production. They can lead to a risk of obesity or higher cholesterol. But how is it getting into our water? Well, while no one would intentionally spread PFAS on their lawns where it can run off into nearby water or be absorbed into the soil nearby where it leaches into our drinking water supply, it turns out that some of our most popular commercially available fertilizers contain a fairly high level of PFAS, like Patti was talking about before with the biosolids. The latest EPA limits for PFAS contamination in drinking water is 4 parts per trillion, which is very, very, very small. Scientists think that, in fact, we are not measuring it in small enough quantities, that PFAS contamination of even parts per quadrillion is what we really want to talk about, but we don't have the technology to measure at that level yet. Now put that aside for one moment if you can, and let's talk about nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential for plants to grow. Nitrogen is something that plants pull out of the air. They take what they need, and as they decompose, the nitrogen breaks down into the soil. It's a really nice recycling system. But nitrogen can also be a big problem if there's too much of it when it enters water. This is blue-green algae on a body of water. It's not necessarily Long Island. This algae forms when there's too much nitrogen, and the algae creates a condition known as hypoxia that takes all the oxygen out of the water and feeds the algae. Fish die, other aquatic mammals die. It's a big mess, and unfortunately, it's really fatally toxic to dogs as well. You should never let your dog drink out of somewhere where there's algae. In groundwater, nitrogen can cause severe medical problems, including something called blue baby syndrome. It's especially dangerous for babies under 6 months. So those are two significant threats to our water supply, and both of them come from fertilizer. PFAS in our lawn fertilizer, and PFAS and nitrogen, excess nitrogen in our lawn fertilizer. In Suffolk County especially, septic systems are often the cause of too much nitrogen in the water supply, but we understand that the second leading cause of too much nitrogen in our water supply comes from fertilizer. And that's the one thing that we have a great ability to influence directly, which is why I'm here today. Long Island Water's goal is to protect our surface water and our drinking water on Long Island by reducing or eliminating all fertilizers that have more than 12% nitrogen or any PFAS content. We invite you to visit our website, liwater.org, where you can learn about where to purchase and what to purchase if you want to get a safer fertilizer. We encourage you to follow us on Facebook and keep track of us, and to support legislation when it comes to you, when we get it through the legislation. We're working on it, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, so that was great, Lauren. I just wanted to backtrack a little tiny bit
Sure.
on how PFAS gets into the water, gets into the fertilizer. We've talked a lot about biosolids, and this is where they're coming from sewage sludge. And there's always PFAS in our wastewater and in the water that goes through our sewage treatment plants, which cannot remove it. But there's another source of PFAS in fertilizers that we have been investigating. We have been sending samples of different fertilizers, very commonly used on Long Island, to laboratories, Galbraith laboratories in the South, because they do a lot of testing for it, and Pace laboratories right here on Long Island. And what we're looking for is the presence of PFAS. And we're sending not only fertilizers that are made with biosolids, but we're also sending fertilizers that are called slow release fertilizers. Now, this slow release fertilizer is a fertilizer that releases the nitrogen over time. And so in order to do that, they encapsulate or they cover the fertilizer, the granules, okay? And it can be covered in a variety of substances. They can use clay, they can use natural substances, but they can also use plastic, which is typically what is used in slow release fertilizers. That plastic is usually olefin, and that plastic actually contains PFAS. And so as it breaks down over time and releases the fertilizer into the soil, it is also releasing PFAS from the plastic, and it is also releasing what we call MNPs, which are micro and nanoplastic particles. And so we're concerned about that as well. And right now, the focus for us from chemical contamination is PFAS and also nanoplastics and microplastics, because we're finding them not only everywhere in the environment, in the deepest part of the oceans and in the highest, peaks like Mount Everest. We are finding these plastic particles in human bodies, and the concentration of them, the highest concentration of MNPs or micro and nanoplastics, is in the brain. And so there's great concern by the medical community and the research community as to what this actually means. And we know in some cases it can cause kidney failure. It's in our blood. The kidneys are the filters in our body. And so we just need to be aware of all the sources of nanoplastics so that we can be much more careful about eliminating them from our environment. So that's I just wanted to add that little bit of information. So the PFAS contamination comes from the biosolids, which is a sewage sludge, which is a solid waste product that everyone's trying to get rid of. And I want to talk a little bit about what Governor Hochul wants to do with it. But it also comes from those slow release fertilizers that are encapsulated in plastic. And so that's why the legislation here on Long Island, because our water is, the source of our water is so fragile. We just really need to be super, super careful about, what we're putting on the ground, and essentially every drop of water that comes out of our homes, everything that goes down our drains. So this is really, really important. I just want to tell you that Governor Hochul has decided, because we always have a solid waste issue, and this is just across the country, actually across the planet. Solid waste is really hard to get rid of, right? We just don't know what to do with it. We don't know where to put it. We don't know what kind of trouble it's going to cause in those places that we've decided to put it. But Governor Hochul has decided that we're going to deal with solid waste coming from sewage treatment plants by literally making 80% of the farms in New York State use solid waste use biosolids for their fertilizer. And so there's a huge effort by people all over the state, including us, to push back on this idea of hers, this new policy, because she doesn't really understand the science. She doesn't really understand the environment. And, you know, for something as tragic as this could be, we are really, really concerned about, you know, getting this thing turned around. In the state of Maine, they have banned fertilizer containing biosolids, absolutely banned it. And they're going across the state of Maine and they're literally closing farms forever. And even dairy farms, because they're finding that, you know, the cows are eating the grass on these farms, and the soil contains these biosolids, and they're finding it in their milk, and all the other dairy products that are being produced from those farms. So this is something just for you to be aware of. New York State is really at risk for something as serious as that. And I believe that Michigan is the second state to ban biosolids as well on all farms. So anyway, that's it. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to answer. And, you know, I can talk about the aquifers. I can talk about, you know, anything that you're interested in. And no, you don't really need to fertilize your lawn. I see that there's a question there. The best thing to do with your lawn, if you have a lawn, is to mow it and leave the grass clippings on it, because those grass clippings will actually provide nitrogen for your lawn. You don't need to use fertilizer at all, but you know, we are creatures of habit. Our parents put fertilizer on their lawns. We think we have to do it. We go to the big box stores and there's the, you know, the different products, and it says, you know, your lawn is going to be beautiful. You have the most beautiful lawn in the neighborhood, and everybody thinks that, you know, the American lawn is something that they need to strive for. So anyway, you don't need to fertilize your lawn at all.
Thank you, Patty.
Synthetic
Thank you.
fertilizers actually kill some of the very, very beneficial organisms that are in the soil. Synthetic fertilizers are really bad. If you're going to put anything down, you'll put down an organic fertilizer that has a low nitrogen content, no biosolids, no nothing, and it is released over time as the plants need it. And that's just, you know, that's just the best way to do it if you're going to get fertilizer at all. And on that website that Lauren showed you, liwater.org, there is a whole list of fertilizers that contain no biosolids, which means no PFAS, and they just, and the nitrogen and other nutrients are released slowly as the plants are in need of it. That's it.
Any other question? I have a question here. Clover. I've heard clover is a nitrogen fixing.
Yes, it is. It's great. It's great to have a variety of things in your lawn, never to just have, certainly never to have just one type of, you know, of grass. You want to have a mixture of different types of grasses always, you know, the tall fescues and short fescues and clover and so on. You want to have always a mixture, so that if you have some kind of a disease in one, you know, in one particular plant, it's not going to spread and take your whole lawn apart. So
Yes,
always a mixture, and clover is great in lawns.
Yep, so I've heard. And we have, can you talk more about artificial turf? What policies are in place to stop that?
Well, artificial turf is a is a 2-hour conversation, but I can just say that you know, this is another case where we have a solid waste product. We have a solid waste product which is used tires, and they are really not, you know, they're not appropriate for landfills because of their concave shape. And when it rains, they become mosquito breeding grounds, right? There's the water stays in those tires, and the mosquitoes, and they're also quite toxic because of the makeup, the chemical makeup of the tires. And so the EPA has something called the RCRA law, which is the, you know, resource and recovery, whatever it is. I can't remember the exact title of it, but it allows you to take a toxic waste product, and if you make it into if you recycle it by making it into a useful product, it no longer is considered toxic. So this is crazy. They do the same thing with fluoride. Fluoride comes from the phosphate fertilizer industry in the form of fluorosilicic acid, and they sell it to public water supplies all over the country to fluoridate their water with. Of course, everyone, if you're reading about what the EPA is doing right now on fluoride, they're basically saying, no, fluoride is a neurotoxin. It's especially dangerous for young children. It should not be in our water supply, period. And this is after decades and decades of pushing this on the public. Fluoridation is really not good. The only type of fluoride that is useful for preventing dental caries is topical fluoride, which you put on and then you rinse off. You never should take it internally. Anyway, I could talk about fluoride forever, but that's a little thing about fluoride. But there's another reuse of a waste product, a toxic waste product, and they made it into something quote unquote positive and useful. And so they're allowed to sell it, and it doesn't come under any of the laws for toxic waste. Same thing with these tires that are being used for artificial turf, right? They grind up these tires. It takes about 40,000 tires to provide cushioning and infill for a single football field. Now, we have no idea where these tires come from. They come from cars, buses, trucks, construction equipment, and so on. And each tire is made with a different formulation. Many of the tires are about 40% carbon black. Carbon black is a known human carcinogen. There are heavy metals in tires. There are phthalates in tires, which are endocrine disruptors and potential carcinogens. There are volatiles and semi-volatiles, and that is what is in the cushioning material for synthetic turf. It's the most common cushioning or infill material. They also use ground up Nike sneakers, and but they're also plastic, and they also have chemicals in them. So every infill has some problem associated with it, but the most common is the tires, is the ground up, what they call crumb rubber. And so when you put these fields together, first of all, it's a plastic carpet and it's little blades of plastic grass, right? They stand up like this. And that plastic has PFAS in it and lead and other chemicals, because plastic is always a formula of a fossil fuel, typically oil or gas, and then chemicals. And those chemicals change according to the type of plastic that is being manufactured. There's certain attributes to plastic that people want. They want it to be soft, they want it to be flexible, they want it to be hard. And so they add different chemicals to it to give it these qualities. Synthetic turf also has PFAS in it, and I said both in the plastic, the carpet and the grass, as well as in the infill material. So that PFAS runs off those fields, okay, into the surrounding environment, as well as the nanoplastics, the MNPs, the micro and nanoplastics, because one way that plastic breaks down into these tiny, tiny little particles, and not just one way, but the most prevalent way, is through UV radiation or sunlight. And you can't get a better scenario, right? Because you have open fields that are exposed to sunlight constantly. And so that plastic breaks down, and you can see it powders a little bit first, and then it breaks down into these tiny, tiny particles until you can't see them anymore, these nanoparticles. And they run off into surrounding areas. It could be neighborhoods, it could be wild, areas, it could be streams, it could be anything, and eventually into our aquifer as well. And so you have that issue. You also have the heat issue. On a 97-degree day, that field could be upwards of 190 degrees, almost 200 degrees. And what they do is they sell water cannons to actually water down the field to cool it off, but it only lasts for about 20 minutes. And then they have to stop the play and they cool it down again. And it's ridiculous. And kids, are suffering from heat-related illnesses. They're also suffering from burns. You actually can get burns on the bottom or the soles of your feet through your socks and sneakers on these 200 degrees fields. And then you have, you just have a lot of injuries that are new to turf, which would be something called turf toe, where it's a sprain of the big toe. And then you have very serious ankle and knee injuries from non-contact injuries. And these injuries that athletes get, both student athletes and professional athletes, they're more severe and they take longer to heal. And then, one of the things that the industry likes to tell schools and municipalities and why they should put in artificial turf is because you don't have to use pesticides. You don't have to use pesticides. You don't have to do anything. There's no maintenance. Absolutely, there is maintenance. It actually says in their own manuals that after every game or every practice that you should be actually disinfecting that field for body fluid spills. We're talking about spit. We're talking about vomit. We're talking about blood. We're talking about, anything that these, that these athletes, are actually leaving on that field. It should be disinfected because with natural grass, the insects and all the mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria and all those things can help break down these pathogens, but not on a piece of plastic. They don't break down for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I mean, there are a lot of other things that are involved. They use a lot of flame retardants, which are also persistent chemicals, because kids think it's really fun to light these fields on fire. And you know how tires burn really, really easily. And so all you need to do is just light a match and throw it on the field, and it'll just go up like that because tires burn like crazy. Okay, so there you go. So they add flame retardants to it as well. So artificial turf is a disaster, and it's also not capturing CO2, which natural grass is doing. So you have these huge fields that are not helping our climate in any way. In fact, they are heat sinks. They are just drawing in more and more heat, and that obviously has to do with the the high temperatures as well, and how serious they are for students to be playing on. Anyway, artificial turf is a big deal, and it should never be used. New York State has a law which will go into effect on January 1st, 2026. Which will prohibit the installation of any new synthetic turf fields. It's actually a carpet bill, and the carpet bill is prohibiting PFAS, okay, in any new carpets in New York State. And they also included outdoor carpets, and they actually said artificial turf carpets. So that will go into effect, and you would think that schools and those administrators who have a duty of care for all of the students that are in their district would be really concerned about this. They might even be thinking about taking their artificial turf fields out and bringing them back to natural grass, which is what a lot of the professional sports teams are doing because they hate playing on artificial turf. Okay, but they're not. They are going as fast as they can to put in these fields before the law takes place. It's crazy. They're being pressured really intensely by the industry to do it. Anyway, that's my spiel on artificial turf.
Oh, no, it's terrible. And I know our school district did that, and I believe the city is also doing it on the playgrounds.
Yep.
Yeah, and having a tough time keeping the dogs off it.
Oh, yeah.
Because, you cannot afford policing those turfs to keep the dogs off. So at the beginning they did, and now they cannot. So
No,
you
it's
will have dogs
ridiculous because then you have dog waste on the
Exactly.
field, which you can't get off.
Exactly. And then there are kids, of course, lying there, rolling there, playing there. So
And putting their water bottles down, their plastic water bottles down, and then drinking out of them, and then putting them back down and drinking out of them.
Absolutely. I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions here.
I added a few links to the chat. We have a page on artificial turf if people would like to see more. And there's also a link to liwater.org, as I mentioned before.
Perfect. We have a question here. What about plastic water bottles? Do they contain PFAS?
We don't know for sure, but many of them have been tested, and the biggest concern, besides PFAS, which is in some of the bottles. In fact, somebody from the American Chemistry Council told me that we can't make plastic without using PFAS, because as Lauren said, PFAS is something that is stain resistant, it's water resistant, and it has non-stick qualities. And that non-stick quality is very useful in the manufacture of plastic, because as it goes through the process, especially extruders and molds, that, you know, the plastic is good, the liquid plastic is going into, the PFAS allows it not to just go through those extruders and not get stuck in those molds. And so it's very commonly used for the plastic manufacturing process. There was a study done by researchers at Columbia University and Rutgers on plastic water bottles, and they were looking for MNPs, micro and nanoplastics. They were finding approximately 340,000 nanoplastic particles in a 16-ounce bottle of water. That was kind of average. And so there's great concern about finding a good water source where you are not drinking plastic and where you are not drinking chemicals that the plastic is actually made from.
Probably takeaway containers as well. Takeout containers, the plastic takeout containers.
Oh, 100%. Plastic takeout containers and paper containers that are lined with, you can see it's kind of shiny on the lining of the paper containers that you get your takeout food in. That's all PFAS. That is non-stick and it's stain proof, so it doesn't go through the paper. It's, you know, we are exposed to it in so many places. It is just absolutely ubiquitous. I want to say something else about the water bottles, and that is that these researchers at Columbia and Rutgers actually found that some of the plastics were coming off reverse osmosis systems. Now, a lot of people on Long Island have reverse osmosis purifiers underneath their sinks, right?
Yes.
And what they were finding is that because those reverse osmosis systems are using plastic filters, they're usually 4 or 5 filters on an RO system, they are actually shedding the plastic into the quote unquote purified water. They take the PFAS out very well. They do a really good job at doing that, but at the same time, they are actually shedding MNPs or micro or nanoplastics into the finished product.
How amazing.
This is the good news show.
So this brings us to our next question.
Yes.
Which is, it seemed that we can't escape this PFAS. How do we protect our families?
Oh, how do we protect our families from PFAS? Well, okay, so let me just tell you all right, PFAS is one thing. I need to just tell you about plastics, because at this point in all the years that we have been working on this and talking to researchers, we think that the plastics issue may be even more important than the PFAS issue. And as Lauren said, PFAS can be toxic in parts per quadrillion. We have never measured in parts per quadrillion because we don't have the tools to do that. Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who's a former head of National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, it's NIEHS, part of the NIH, National Institutes of Health, said that there is toxicity in parts per quadrillion of PFAS. I mean, you know, we just have to stop using it. We have to stop producing it. 3M is the greatest producer of PFAS. They are it. 3M and Chemours, SHEMOURS. if any of you are stockholders, you could go to a stockholder meeting and ask them why they're poisoning the planet with this chemical. Okay, but the nanoplastics are really important, and the two greatest sources of the nanoplastics are, number one, tires that are actually rolling along a road surface, because as they are going along that road surface, they're actually shedding tiny little particles constantly on roads. So if you live near a highway or if you live near a busy road, make sure that you have some kind of filtration in your home. And that's really important. So that's your number one source. And I see that Carrie has said, what about fabrics? And that is the number two source, is textiles. And we're really concerned because children wear so many synthetic, pieces of, or garments, I should say, synthetic garments. And now as winter is coming along, we're going to put them in fleeces, all polyester fleeces. We're going to put them in coats where the outside of the fabric has been coated with PFAS, and the insides of the coats are all this fuzzy, warm, synthetic, polyester, fiber fill, or whatever it is. And so this is really problematic. There is a company that makes coats and clothing for children and adults. I'm just trying to think. It's Wolf Jack. The name of the company is Jack Wolfskin. That's Wolf, WOLFSKIN. Jack Wolfskin. It's a German company. They make non-PFAS outer, fabric, and they make no nanoplastics in the filling or the linings. And so, it's just tough. It's really, really tough. I mean, your child, has a 6-year-old birthday party, and, grandma brings them a new, beautiful, fuzzy, soft blanket to sleep with. And it's just loaded with these tiny little fibers, millions and millions, billions of these little fibers that they can inhale as they're sleeping. So, wool, cotton, linen, bamboo. Wool, cotton, linen, bamboo. You need to use natural fibers. This is all really coming to a head. I mean, for years and years, decades, researchers have known about these things. And it's just, we're at the point now where we're super aware of this in the scientific research community. And nobody really listens to the scientific world, right? I mean, and they can't really get very far in the political realm because these big manufacturers are so connected with governments and politicians, and they have such deep pockets. It's really hard for the scientists to say, hey, wait a minute, you should stop making that product that's making you $480 billion a year and driving our economy. The only thing that's more important than that is our own purchasing, our purchasing power, right? We say, no, we're not going to buy that anymore. We want wool. We want wool. We want cotton. Organic cotton would be nice. We want natural fibers to put on our bodies and our children's bodies. We don't want all your plastic stuff. And it's all, I don't know if you've heard of something called fast fashion. Fast fashion is these places where you can go online, you can buy all kinds of things for super cheap prices. And, they fall apart. They're just, they're poorly constructed and they fall apart, and then we just throw them away, or we give them to the thrift shop, and eventually they wind up, overseas somewhere, and then eventually in Chile. And that's where all the textiles go, the waste, the solid waste textiles. I believe it's Chile. Might be Peru, but I don't know. Somewhere in South America. But it's
and Africa as well.
Yes, Africa as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the more you think about it, the more depressed you become, right?
You can't be depressed. You have to do it for your own family, and then
Yes,
you have to teach all your neighbors and your friends about this, because there's nothing, there's nothing more powerful than public opinion. And public opinion
agreed.
is where we need to go. We need to not have, we need to not have grass and, and non-native plants in our yards. And we need to have natural fibers, on our bodies, and we need to just be aware of these things. And it's just all about education.
Absolutely.
I'm so happy that you're doing this. Are they in paints? What,
Uh,
PFAS? Yes.
There is another question here. I think there was one which says, are metal cans lined with plastic that contains PFAS?
Yes. No, actually, it
And
doesn't contain PFAS, contains BPA, bisphenols.
But not
Bis-
always.
Not, well, okay, so you have a can, and they say right on the can, no BPA, or this can is BPA free. They're kind of getting away with something, because it could have BPF in it, or BPX in it, or BP, whatever. That bisphenol family has all different, permutations of that chemical. And they're just as toxic, and they're mostly endocrine disruptors, the bisphenols. So when you see BPA free, I always wonder about whether it really is BPA free. I say buy things in glass. You can buy tomatoes in glass, you can buy beans in glass, you can make your own, buy dried, and soak them in vinegar overnight, rinse them, and then put good water in them, and then cook them yourself, and then put them in glass jars and put them in your freezer. My freezer is full of glass jars filled with things that I've made myself.
non-stick cookware as well?
Nonstick cookware is Teflon. That is a really, really bad,
Yeah. Yeah.
really bad thing to have in your house.
Yeah,
Get rid of
I
them.
don't know if anyone's aware here. I don't know if there are bird owners here in the audience, but if you're a bird owner, oh, there you are, Lauren. You throw away all your non-stick cookware, right?
Years and years ago.
Years and years ago. Yeah, as like if it's fatal to birds, imagine what it can do to humans. Slowly, maybe, not as quick. I have another question here. What else can we use the biosolid for? There's plenty of it and we produce it every day.
Ha, that's a really good question. Biosolids would be completely fine if we didn't use so many products that go down our drains, and things that we eat. Keep in mind, things that we eat that we actually eliminate, okay, through our waste, that go into these sewage treatment plants. So that's where the PFAS is coming from. It's the products that are going down our drains, like shampoos and liquid soaps and conditioners and makeup. As Lauren showed, it's in mascara. You look at the mascara advertisements, it says waterproof mascara. What do you think makes it waterproof? PFAS, right? So it's in a lot of the products that we use, a lot of personal care products that we use, and a lot of products that we use for cleaning our homes. And then, of course, it's in all the, as you mentioned, all the takeout containers that we get from restaurants. That's a huge problem. I mean, take your own container to the restaurant. Start a thing to take your own container. It's crazy, because it's cheap, and it's fast, and it's convenient, and it's really hard for us to let go of that and to do something that takes a little bit more time, a little bit more effort, but you're protecting your family. And what's more important than that?
Agreed. I don't see any more questions here, but we have another one. What about black plastic compost tumblers? Scary?
Um, well, you have to understand that plastic is a material that, when used over and over, okay, let's say you have a tumbler, okay, and you're using it over and over and over, and you've got stuff inside it that's, kind of abrading the inside of it. So you're going to get microplastics from those plastic tumblers. How many? I don't know. Who's counting? Who's going to send it? I mean, at this point, when we send our samples to the laboratories, we just ask for what's called a total fluorine content, because the fluorine will tell us that there is PFAS in it. If I wanted to test for all the PFAS chemicals, I would actually have to pay for this lab to do 15,000 tests. You can't do individual chemicals. I mean, you can do PFOA and PFOS. Those are the ones that the EPA is now limiting. That's what that limit that Lauren said, 4.4 parts per trillion. That's the limit now in drinking water. We have a drinking water limit. States can do better than that. States can always make their drinking water limit safer than the EPA, but the EPA has finally come out for those 2 out of 15,000. Those 2, but those are the most commonly used ones, right? So they have that, right now as a law. And so now all the water districts are just scrambling to try to get those levels down. The Port Washington district Port Washington Water District had to send out a notice to every single resident that we are now testing 10 parts per trillion, actually over 10 parts per trillion of PFAS in our water supply. That's really high, but not as high as some places on Long Island. There are much higher places, but 10 parts per trillion is way over the EPA's limit now. And they have to bring that down by spending all this money. And of course, the water districts are now suing 3M and Chemours to pay for all of this equipment that they have to purchase for getting the PFAS out of the water. It's a crazy, crazy life we're living.
I was just thinking this is a perfect Halloween webinar.
Perfect. I should have worn my witch's hat.
This is scary.
It is scary.
It's scary.
It's not, and it's real. You can look it up everywhere.
Yes.
And it's so, it's a common discussion among researchers now. I mean, some people just used to work on heavy metals like lead. Speaking of lead and water, it's really important. We still have some lead supply lines on Long Island. Places like Bayville still have lead supply lines, and that's problematic. You may also have supply lines that just have lead solder on them. When the pipes come together, they solder them, and that could be lead solder. So, the federal government is spending billions of dollars to replace all lead supply lines across the country. And they should replace them with copper. It is your safest material. They can
Absolutely.
also replace them with ceramic as another safe material and so on. But guess who was right there saying, we want to be part of the bidding process? PVC pipe manufacturers, polyvinyl chloride plastic pipes, those white pipes that you see all the time in new construction, those should only be used for wastewater. That's it. They should never be used for supply. There's a place here on Long Island, I think it was in Cold Spring Harbor. In fact, I'm sure it was. They put in a new development and children were being diagnosed with leukemia. And we're like, what's going on? Why are we also seeing this leukemia, this rate going up in this new neighborhood? They had actually used PVC pipe for the supply lines. So my worry is that they're going to be replacing the lead pipes with PVC pipes because they're cheaper than copper. Another issue.
Well,
You
Yep.
could spend your whole life. You just take one issue and then for the rest of your life, you just work on that.
Yep. And probably one of the last questions of this evening, and probably to go with the black plastic compost tumblers, we have a question. Guess that's plastic rain barrels too. So what
But
would
when
be
it
your
rains,
choice?
I mean, keep in mind, when it rains, it's raining plastic. particles. I mean, it's in our water, it's in our air, it's in our food, it's in everything. I mean, it's almost impossible to avoid
It's dangerous.
nanoplastics now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the Mariana Trench. It's the deepest part of the ocean, of
Right.
all the oceans on the planet, the Mariana Trench, and there's plastic in there, lots of plastic, and on Mount Everest, the highest peak on the earth.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yes.
Happy Halloween.
Happy
Are you-
Halloween.
Are you glad you spoke to us?
You have to just, you have to just do your best. But
Yes, exactly.
knowledge is powerful.
I believe it's kind of very similar to global warming, which is like, slowly
Yes, it
inching
is.
towards that. But, if you can do something about it, be aware of your choices, I guess.
Right. Plant trees. Everybody can plant trees. Just plant trees for global warming. It's the only thing that an individual can do. Just get out there and plant trees. Native trees.
Native trees.
Native trees. Convince your municipality to put in a what they call, these small forests. I can't remember. There's a name for them. Somebody here must know what they're called. Just, where you take a piece of land that's, part of a field that, next to a municipal building or something. Just ask them if you can just put a small forest in there and plant 50 trees. Why not?
Yes.
Just ask them if you can do it. And, it's not a big deal. We're doing a little bit of that in the town of North Hempstead. We've done that over at Tully Park in New Hyde Park. But
I believe Patti, Gloria has a question here.
When it comes to the top 2 or 3 things you've done at home to protect your family, what are they?
the top 2 or 3 things, number 1 is water filtration, and we're still working on that. We have 2 whole house filters in our basement, and that actually they're granulated carbon filters, and they actually purify. They take out PFAS. They take out all kinds of other chemicals that we're concerned about, and sediment and whatever. So that's that. But they are fiberglass tanks, but they're lined with polyethylene, right? So that's a plastic inside the lining of the filters. That's a problem with the filtration world, water filtration world, is that they are just heavily into plastics. They've been focusing so much on the chemicals, that they're trying to remove, and the pathogens that they're trying to remove from the water, and the sediment and the smell and the taste and all those other things that they really focus on, that they just kind of bypass this whole idea that they're using plastic for those processes. And so that's very problematic. So then you use a distiller. We have a distiller. So then that water then for drinking and cooking. And so the distiller is something that takes out anything that might be left in that water. But the distillers that they sell today, they have a pre-filter on them and a post-filter on them, and both of those are plastic, which we have removed. But you have to just be super aware of that. And the other thing is that there's nothing in the house that is outgassing, like formaldehyde or so you just want to make sure you fix up your house and you polyurethane your floors. Polyurethane is really toxic, and it's toxic for a while because you can smell it, right? And when you paint, you have to be really careful about the paints that you buy, because the indoor air quality, or IAQ, is more problematic than outdoor air quality. And we don't have particular problems with outdoor air quality unless you're next to a highway or a incinerator, or an industry where they're polluting your air around your home. But in other places where the outdoor air is really toxic, at least it's mixing with fresh air. Inside your home, you're using scented candles, you're using air fresheners, you're using toxic cleaning products in your kitchen and in your laundry, you're using Bounce, you're using all these things that are highly toxic and they never leave. And so your indoor air quality is super compromised. And so that's the second thing that's really important: water, and then indoor air quality. And then, of course, what you're cooking in and what you're storing your food in and what you're buying that is, possibly packaged in plastic. I mean, we don't have any co-ops on Long Island. It's amazing to me. It's amazing. There are no co-ops where you can buy bulk everything. You buy bulk everything. I mean, I buy 50 pounds of oatmeal, 50 pounds of, einkorn flour, and I buy it in these triple paper bags. They're very, very sturdy, and they have a little cotton string at the top. You pull the cotton string off, and then you just decant them into whether you're cooking or if you're going to store them in other things or share them with, like I do with my daughters, put them into big glass ball jars. But it's crazy we don't have any co-ops. I mean, I do all my shopping at co-ops, either in New London, Connecticut, on the way to visit my daughter in Boston, or in Northampton, Massachusetts, on the way to New Hampshire, or Albany has a great co-op. I go to Albany a lot for legislation and meetings with legislators. So we belong to 3 co-ops.
Brooklyn has a co-op.
That's where you get your food, and you have to have a garden in your backyard. Everybody has to have a garden in their backyard where you can get your fresh, tomatoes and, just your perennial vegetables, and then your seasonal vegetables.
Okay, thank you, Patti and Lauren. And I think we'll say bye and happy Halloween again.
And thanks. Gloria
So,
said, thank you, eek.
very informative. Very informative.
All right. And we're available to call anytime. Just grassrootsinfo.org. You can write to us, or you can call us. If you go on our website, there's a number of the office, and we're happy to answer any questions, provide you with materials. We have tons of materials on all kinds of things that you can share with your neighbors and your family. And so please feel free to reach out to us anytime.